سلام نیویورک. و صبح بخیر. خیلی ممنون هستم از دعوت شما. I will not give my presentation in my terrible Persian, but instead in English, and I thank very much the organizers for including me in this event. I thank Ali Kadivar, graduate student at North Carolina, for helping me to put together the presentation. And I thank and salute Kian Tajbash and the thousands of other political prisoners in Iran for their courage, their endurance, their intellectual, cultural contributions, political contributions, the outcome of which is all very unclear at this point. The topic of my presentation is cultural Jiu-Jitsu in this Iranian green movement that has emerged over the past year. I'm going to review a little bit of the history that's already been discussed and presented to you so well. Starting with the election, the presidential election on June 12th. We knew on the day of the election that something was going wrong when the election monitoring system that the opposition had set up was shut down. This system, which was using cell phones and electronic communications to have election monitors spread out across the capital and across the country, communicate with the central office in order to tally up votes, to tally up, to observe and take note of irregularities. This system was shut down on the afternoon of the election. Electronic media have been one of the backbones of the green movement over the past year, and it's been vulnerable to this kind of interruption on and off, but has found ways to recover and to move around these barriers. One example is Mir Hossein Mousavi's Facebook page. Even saying that sounds funny to me still, after a year. The idea that a presidential candidate in Iran would have a Facebook page. But in fact, it's become a source for information for the green movement, along with many, many other websites. Even after the official campaign website, mirhossein.com, was shut down, the Facebook page remained. It was out of the reach of the Iranian government and continues to be one of the central ways for distributing information. The election results were issued the next day in a hurried manner before the required 3-day waiting period, confirming suspicions that the whole thing had been rigged in some way. You can find several days later, on June 24th, precinct-level electoral results were made available from the Ministry of the Interior's website. Again, electronic media being used on all sides. And you can download these, province by province, extremely detailed electoral data, which suggest that the fraud, if it occurred, as I assume to some extent it did, was really quite well done. It's hard to find really obvious markers in there, in this precinct-level data, of which numbers were manipulated. Not to say they weren't, simply that there are very few smoking guns in this ream of data that for the first time ever has been made publicly available. The electoral results show, as you all know, that the incumbent president, Ahmadinejad, won a huge victory throughout the entire country, even in regions that were thought to be strongholds of the opposition, with only 2 provinces going for Mousavi, West Azerbaijan in the far northwest, and Sistan and Baluchistan in the far southeast, both of which are provinces inhabited primarily by ethnic minorities. These results were immediately considered suspicious, and protests began the following day. These protests were originally spontaneous. They were very widespread. I think they took everybody by surprise, including the opposition, the extent to which people were willing to go out into the streets and to publicly identify themselves as supporters of the opposition in the face of potentially great danger. This is one of the many, many pictures distributed from those first few days of protest. And you see on the sign, Royaman Ku, where's my vote? Although Ku instead of Koja, meaning where, is sort of a slangy word, I think. Certainly not the standard phrase you would use. So in a way, it might translate as, where's my vote at? A little more slangy. You see young people then wearing the green, the symbol of the Mousavi campaign, that it had quite, in a media-savvy way, used to brand itself, to allow simply a ribbon to convey in a subtle but effective way one's support for the opposition. You notice here wearing sunglasses to avoid identification and a face scarf. This is not the niqab. This is not an Islamically devout face covering. This is simply to avoid being identified. We notice here and in many of the pictures we saw earlier that photographers of these protests seem to be disproportionately, well, attracted to young, good-looking female protesters, often with some hair showing. I think in part because sex sells, but in part also because it runs counter to the Western image of the repressed Muslim woman and feeds into the Western desire to liberate Muslim women. And here they are standing up for the right to show several inches of hair, as we see in this photograph. Notice also the use of the English phrase, "Where is my vote?" appealing to an international audience and not just to domestic audiences. One way to conceive, to think about these protests as they've unfurled throughout the past months, I think, is to turn to the Eastern martial art called Jiu-Jitsu. Here's a website from the International Jiu-Jitsu Federation, which explains better than I, the gentle art, or the art of subtleness, for that is the meaning of Jiu-Jitsu, which neutralizes power, not with power, but through absorbing an attack and converting the energy to the opponent's own detriment. I think that's a good summary of the strategies of the Green Movement these days, to use the power, to use the rituals, to use the history of the Islamic Republic against the regime of the Islamic Republic. Jiu-Jitsu is not unknown in Iran. In fact, there's a fairly prominent Asian self-defense and Jiu-Jitsu Federation. But that's not the main usage, the literal usage that I want to focus on today. Instead, I want to focus on this phrase, political jiu-jitsu, that was popularized by a theorist of nonviolence, an American named Gene Sharp, who was very much influenced by Gandhi's nonviolence and other techniques of nonviolence in the civil rights movement here in the United States, and wished to apply them to the Cold War. Civil defense was his theme throughout the Cold War, the idea of creating nonviolent systems of resistance that, in case of a Soviet attack, could be used to repel or to resist any kind of foreign occupation peacefully through disobedience, through using the power of one's overlords against them. Political jiu-jitsu is the phrase he gave to this. He's since turned, after the Cold War, to the promotion of nonviolent pro-democracy protests around the world. And the Iranian government became concerned after the color revolutions in various post-communist states over the last several years that Gene Sharp and others were promoting similar types of velvet revolutions or colorful revolutions in Iran. So here is a regional television broadcast in Iran, captured by Memory TV, the Israeli-based organization that tries to find the worst of Middle Eastern media statements and popularize them and make them widely available. And this is one where an animatronic version of Gene Sharp sits at a table with, I'm now forgetting, some CIA character and somebody else, maybe it was George Bush. And he's identified by the Iranians, the translation is Memories, but it's accurate, Gene Sharp, the theoretician of civil disobedience and velvet revolutions. And these animatronic figures have a chat about how they're trying to overthrow Iran. I mean, it's quite amusing. You can find it on YouTube and at Memory